talking.
Good evening. Welcome to the new podcast, Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. Our topics include sexual abuse, religious abuse, church division, and addictions at large. We offer live counseling sessions, a counseling continuum, and meaningful question and answer sessions. The team includes Lolita Williams, our personnel director. Linda Holmes is an LPN, technical director, Ms. Tennille, and myself, Prince, licensed counselor, founder of Antioch Youth Center, a counseling program, and I am retired. The views and opinions expressed on the podcast are those of our guests and may not necessarily reflect our opinions here at Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. Be advised this topic contains sensitivity in content. Some may find it offensive or disturbing, but we just wanted to let you know we advise that to be careful what you're listening to. We have two very special guests. Brother Edward, successful businessman. He's a father, grandfather, husband. Been with the church just about 40 years almost. Our other guest, of course, is you, our listeners. You can chat in on the program live at this time by going to YouTube, Church of God in Macon, Georgia. You can also contact the office, which is 478-784-7600. And of course, our email address is reach1, REECHONE at AOL.com. You can connect with us also through Google, Facebook, and or YouTube. Tonight's discussion, again, is sensitive. We're going to discuss recovery, division recovery. And friends, statistics tell us quite clearly, according to Hartford Institute, Roseanne, Mr. Davis there, the 17% of churches on the west side of the country split. The south, only 12%. The larger cities, 13%, and the smaller towns, 7%, churches split in those areas. And that's from the Hartford Institute. David Rainey suggests that after church splits, it begins to decrease and die from his experience. Mr. Rainey quoted in his book, "When a church split occurs, there is no winner." And friends, I'm sure today you know someone who's been in church division or a split who's been wounded, or maybe yourself. We're trying to reach out, help those to receive forgiveness, healing, and restoration. Ray, Brother Edwards here has been through this. He's going to share with us what happened to him and what God did for him, bringing him through the situation, reconciliation, healing, forgiveness, he and his family. So again, division recovery, talk about that tonight. Brother Ray, so where did it all begin? Where did that journey begin? You're going to take us through what happened to you, and next week, how God brought you through. But for tonight, where did that journey begin with church division and splits?
Well, first, I want to thank you for inviting me to the forum, and I appreciate the opportunity to tell some of our story and the length of. You there?
Yes, we are.
Yep. In the length of time, I don't know how much of it we can cover, but your question was, when did it begin? Well, I got saved in 1977, somewhere out there. Met a brother, and they came to our house, and we knelt before God there in our living room, a greenhouse, a little thing, and we knelt, my wife and I both, and we prayed through to glory and got saved. And it seemed like they invited us to come be in church with them or come be assembling with them. And then we left right after that, went to California to come back. And then we went to be in assembly, we went to be in church with them. And it seemed like, after the fact, you can look back, it seems like now there was a lot of warning signs then, but I just didn't recognize them. And there was a lot of carnality in the midst. It seemed like they were in a fuss to start with. And so that continued on for about 13 years it's sad to say. And probably the first, we fellowshiped together and went together, and there seemed to be always a little bit of issue there about something. And the pastor that I had there, and a group that was there from another town that got saved and were coming in, they ended up in conflict. And we got there one morning, and they had decided that they was going to separate the church, and part of us was going to go to one town, and part of us to another. And so that's definitely not God's way. And so as we continued to live that and tried to live God as he was revealing himself to us, but we seemed to always be in a conflict with what was going on. And probably the first actual split was at a camp meeting in Alabama back in 80 something. And that was different than a church. It was a church split, but it was a congregational split. In other words, when we went there to that fellowship meeting, they was congregations from all over the country. And so by the time the meeting was over with, they had a disagreement over a revelation symbol. They call it the woman in the wilderness. And they was people from Manassas, Jackson, all over the country that were at that meeting. And they told us to leave and come back, and ended up separating over that thing. So that was actually a congregational division.
Ray, I need to jump in here.
Sure.
When the announcement was made that there were going to be a church split at the church you were, what did you feel when you heard there's going to be a church split, when you heard it for the first time? How did you feel?
You talking about when they separated our congregation there, or you want me to go back, or what are we talking about?
The first time they said we're going to.
When we come in and they said we've decided that we're going to have two different groups. One's going to go here, one's another. We wasn't constant. There was no prayer about it. There was nothing. And so my first prayer after that was, God, deliver us from the hand of man. And so that put me in trouble right there with the powers that be, because I just didn't feel like that was God's will. Now, they eventually were two congregations, and they tried to fellowship, but there was always animosity between. And then as time went on, reason I brought up the campground division, that was a foundation for what God later had me take a stand for. Is because as I moved forward and became part of it, well, it seemed like God was telling me to try to help them or work with them. I mean, that might sound strange, but I didn't know what else to do or where to go or what. That's all I knew at that time. But my pastor got caught up in an adulterous situation. He went down, and part of that was because of that split at the camp meeting. Seemed like he lost faith and fell out of love after that split. And he never recovered from it, and so he turned off something else. And so God put it in my heart that I would never ever be a part of separating from people and brethren without just cause, without them going through the steps that you require in the Bible, where you go to the church, and it, like, if your assembly says, okay, you're guilty of sin and we're going to set you aside, I can honor that. But just because I don't like you or don't like what you're teaching, I'm going to cause you to separate. So God showed me that was one thing that I just wasn't going to do. That once I fell in love, once God showed me love and showed me to love the brother, I didn't want to separate from him. And so it rocked on to the after the pastor fell, we got a new minister, and he was very authoritarian. You know, he got to the point where if you didn't read a certain amount of books in the Bible, books out of the library, you'd be sinning. He just got real ridiculous with what he's doing. And so the Lord said, so he called me in the office one time and asked me a question that I told him wasn't Bible and I wasn't going to answer. And so, and I also told him that I wasn't going to separate. I wasn't going to participate. These people that y'all had cut off, as far as I was concerned, they were brothers and sisters, and I was going to continue to fellowship. You see, one thing about a wrong system, they won't let you do stuff like that. And
my next question kind of connects with that. Mm-hmm. What type of pressure or influence did you feel that was designed to keep you in line or keep you in the mix? Was there any influence or pressure that was applied to keep you in the tow?
Well, it was sort of like probably the Davidian branch Davidian or something, where you've got a leader that lifts himself up to where he thinks he's God, and then what he says is law, and they held it heavy that they all speak the same thing, to be no division among you, and they helped submit them to have the rule over you. And so they took that so far that if you rose up or disagreed or had a different thought, you were either set aside or punished, or the rest of the group would turn on you or turn against you. We had somebody one time in the assembly that didn't ask permission to take a vacation. When they got back, the pastor stood them up and now it denounced them, and pretty much they ended up leaving. So that's the kind of that's the kind of stuff you would have going on. And so it was, if you went against the group or went against what was going on, you could look for being people just have nothing to do with you, ignore you, people you'd loved all your life. And see, my children, that's all they knew was Church of God and being raised in that. And then whenever the thing come down where we ended up having to, when the brother said, okay, Ray, you're not saved anymore and you can't be a part of it anymore. Although I was saved and I was standing for what God wanted me to stand for. Well, then there was a lot of others that said this is wrong, the way they handled it. And so they left and got put out. And so it's, you have to understand that back then there was a lot of congregations and they were in agreement. And so you didn't have really anywhere to go in your mind except where you're at. In other words, if you got to believe that if you didn't sit in that pew and listen to that preacher at that time in your life, at that place, and you couldn't go anywhere else, and if you didn't do that, you was going to hell. Well, then you kind of got bound into a spot where you couldn't leave. And so when we call it the bomb went off, when the division within that local congregation finally come about, my wife was very, very disturbed by it. She's just now getting over it because I love the Lord and I got saved to the Lord, and I never ever associated my fellowship with a group with Christ. I mean, it was the same, but I was saved to Christ. And then some people, it affects people different ways. Some people, all they know is the assembly, and the assembly kind of becomes their faith. And then so when people start turning their back on you and starts talking bad about you and won't have nothing to do with you, and when you see them at a grocery store, they turn and walk the other way, then it has a bad effect on it. And then my children we had a church school, they went there, and I told the brother, I said, you can pastor my family. He said, no, he's playing hardball. So he put my children out of the school, wouldn't let them graduate. And the people they knew turned their back on them. So that's the kind of pressure that's being used in some, not every assembly, but the group that we were part of, and it was a pretty large group. That's the way they work things. And so go ahead.
How were other groups viewed? How did you all view other groups, other places, Churches of God, other places?
Well, we basically believe that the group that we assembled with, okay. I mean, this is the theology. I won't say I in my heart I believe it, because if I had, I would still be there. But basically is that our group was it. And if you wasn't part of the group that we were part of, you was going to hell. That mean other Church of Gods. That mean anybody. After I got away from there, I got to meet people all over the country that loved God and were saved, and I never knew they existed, because as far as I knew, as far as I was concerned, see, we didn't do anything. We didn't have TV. We didn't go to movies. We didn't even hardly read newspapers. So we was pretty isolated for 13 years. They're pretty isolated from the world. And so but basically the thought was, if you wasn't in agreement with what we were doing, you were out of order. And so that's pretty well the way we looked at it. Does that sound right? Yeah.
No.
Yes.
I had someone in the chat had asked, how did the split affect your children? How did it affect the children? I'm gonna add to not only my children, but all the young people of that age.
it put a distaste for the word Church of God. Basically a hate for it. In other words, because they were so here, that's all they knew. They was raised up. They loved the people. And now these people were doing weird things to them, and they didn't understand why. And they called themselves Church of God. And they were acting like devils. And so a child knows when somebody's doing right. A child knows when somebody's being innocent or true or representing. They know. And so they didn't understand it. And my daughter, well, I got one son. I don't know if he'll ever step foot in one again. And my oldest son, he might. My daughter has just we're assembling now with the Church of God, and she actually came to service, and my daughter's grand. But there for a while, she said, I'll never set foot in another one of those churches. And because they were just so much, it wasn't just the split, it was the fact that it was a cult type Church of God. And so, it really, the whole thing, it worked a bad work on my children. And not on my children, but there's a lot of other, there's probably 30 kids or so that was that, they're all pretty much that way. A few of them have got reconciled to God, but most of them just, and and some people use that for an excuse for not obeying God. And so I believe that if you obey God and listen to God and follow God, He'll bring you through all the situations, because He said we'd know persecution. And so this is a journey, and we can't get bitter. We can't have hate. We can't feel bad. All the people and everything they've done, I love them just as much as I did day one. In fact, the ex-pastor and I are friends now. And so that persecuted me all over the country. And so, and went to different places trying to bring us into subjection to his will, not God's will. If he'd ever once said, brother, I love the Lord, you love the Lord, come follow me as I follow Christ, I'd have said, man, that's a good idea. But that wasn't what it was. It's come follow me, hook, line, and sinker, no questions asked. And God doesn't require that. I love Brother Moon, but I want to listen to God in him. I want to listen to Christ in him. I don't want to follow Brother Moon. And so, but it really works. It works a havoc, and it depends on where you're at in your experience as to how it affects you. Some people use that as an excuse to go away from God. But there's no excuse for going away from God. I mean, we've got to stay in tune with God. We can't see. I never charged God for any of this. I never said this was Christ's fault. As we were persecuted and chased out, they held a ministers' meeting up in Chicago and had a decree that nobody could leave a congregation without permission. And if you left out of order, you had to go back where you come from. And that was because of what we did, because of me. And so that tells you the scope of the corralling God's people that was there, and it was pretty tight.
Do I have I don't want to stop the flow here, but I'm getting some feedback from the audience, which is awesome.
Please
another question was, for those that were split, or at least the children that decided or didn't want, or even just others who have left the congregation, was there an outreach? Was there something that the church did to reach these people to help them come back? Was there any outreaches? Well,
not really. Like I say, I've lived in the same community since I left. I live 12 miles from the church, and the house I live in, the former pastor used to own. My next door neighbor still goes there. I had other neighbors that went there, and for that's happened 30 years ago, and there's not one of them knocked on my door and said, brother, wow, can we solve a problem? Can we help this thing? Can we do something? Mostly they feel like if you're not, in other words, if you've left, well, then you're out of order, so we don't really have to deal. In other words, you stop being human, kind of. I mean, it's like we can treat you. Christ says we're supposed to love our enemy, okay? But because we're the enemy, they feel like they can treat us different and not obey God's rules concerning people. And so I guess from time to time, but as far as just my ex-neighbor, he's died now, but I think they went and visited him one time or something. But it wasn't, it's like, if y'all wanted, y'all come back. Y'all know where it was. But see, I didn't leave them, they left me. I never left Christ. I never left they left me. I didn't leave them, and they kicked my wife out. And so they just, It's like the train was running down the road and you throw her out the back of the train and she bounces on the highway and they go, oh, well, that's good, I guess. And so it's,
Wow.
it's an interesting experience, but the thing about it, it'll make you draw closer to God. And I never gave up. I never gave up on the belief that God had a people and God had a ministry and God had a minister who could do God's will and who could manifest Christ in all situations and who could love me the way that I felt like God loved me. And so I never gave up on that even though I wasn't seeing it places, and I was going a lot of places, and even in that situation I didn't see it because basically the whole system had gone carnal. It had gone and when you go that way, you bite and devour. And that group that I was part of at one time was a large group. They're down to just a few. They're biting and devouring and cutting off people. They just had another split over beards. If you had a beard, you could be part of them. If you didn't have a beard, if you didn't have a beard, you was accepted. If you had a beard, they cut you off. And so the congregation that I was part of just got cut off for that. So once you start biting and devouring, and every time that happens, somebody's hurt, somebody's destroyed, somebody's they don't understand it because it's not God's will. And that's the sad part of it, is you have people out there today pretending to be God's people and God's representative, and they're not behaving the way God would have them to behave, and it's confusion to the people.
Well, Pastor, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. I have more questions coming in, but go ahead.
No, please, I prefer you, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I have two more.
Yeah,
now, one person wanted to know if the people that went to the other church, did they communicate to those? Since there was a split, was there any communication between these individuals or people?
I'm gonna have to back up and use it. See, the deal that I was, it wasn't really it wasn't what you call the congregation. In other words, they put Christ out of their midst, and then those that agreed with it, they cut off. But you go back to the split of congregations I was talking about, is my pastor at the time sent me up to a congregation in Huntsville to try to reconcile that. They wouldn't even let me come into church. They didn't want nobody to see me. And so those groups, up until maybe here recently, they wouldn't communicate with each other at all. Each group had their own thing, and the others were, there's a guy, Dale Rude, that's got, I don't know by his name, but he got a little chart that shows you all the divisions that's went on over the years. And usually when a group splits from another group, they usually don't have anything to do with them, not very much anyway. And when you leave, when you're put out of a congregation, or you leave a congregation, or there's I don't know, but usually it's, well, there was Brother Pastor Moon, there was a split over in Georgia, and I don't know how those people are working over an issue, and you had one on one side, one on the other, and I don't know if they're talking together now. And so it seems like, see, the scripture says you'll argue to prove somebody right. And so when two sides get to arguing, each one of them thinks they're right, and they think they represent God, and they think they're the one carrying the mantle for God, when in reality they both have lost out. Because once you entered into that type relationship to where you're doing that, you've gone carnal, and so you have lost the spiritual part of your life, and now you're trying to operate out of your own head and out of your own mind. And so there's just people fight and they argue, and I know a brother that's moved up to Missouri that was part of the deal in Georgia, and so he's with a group up there, and his wife, and so it's just, when people won't obey God, and when they won't let the love of God cover a multitude of sins, when people can't fall in love with each other enough that they won't divorce, because a church split is like a divorce. You got the mom and the daddy and the children over there, they got to choose. And so they're the ones that really get hurt out of the deal. And we know God's not in divorce at all. But people do it. They say, well, you can't divorce, but yet they'll split up in a congregation, and where you have sweet fellowship and you love one another, and now all of a sudden they're walking, they're across the street, keep talking from you. And I believe Brother Pastor Moon knows a little bit about that, but people will, because they get under a false spirit and they get under a wrong spirit. But the key to it for an individual, if we're talking to anybody out here that's gone through, the main thing is keep your faith in Christ, believe in him, and believe that what you're going through is just part of the journey. And if you'll hold to him and believe that he will bring you through to a better place. Now, if you stop there to smell the flowers and don't want to go to that better place, so I've been journeying this a long time and been through a lot of situations to get to where I believe God wanted me to be eventually. And so, but you can't, just because some people in a group decide they don't want to act like Christ and want to misbehave, and does not mean that you cannot go on with God. It does not mean that you cannot continue your faith and religion and continue to move forward and continue to love people. You don't have to let hate in, because once you let hate in it, then you're earthly. Because he says we know we pass from death to life because we love the brother. And so it's important that we keep that relationship with Christ. That's the only thing that kept me over the years and kept me through, is I didn't let a religion become my Christ. I didn't let a preacher become my Christ. But I love a preacher and I love a pastor. And so that's not the point, but I'm not going to let them be my God. And so
in our last few minutes, is there any more questions? We got about 2 minutes left. Well, yeah, just 2 minutes.
Well, I don't know if you want to save these questions, but I have about 3. So we can save it. It gets a little bit more detailed.
Okay.
But I'll let you lead here.
Well, friends, again, this is Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches, and we're trying to do our part to reach out to those where we are in the state, in the country, outside the country, to produce and implement some forgiveness and some restoration and some healing. When people are hurting, it's hard to serve God because that wound is there. So we thank Brother Ray for this segment. We're going to talk to him again, how God brought him through this, and his wife and children. And it's a wonderful story. So please come back next Thursday at 7. And we're going to answer those questions that you put in today. Our time did run out, unfortunately. But if you want to put in questions, you can throughout the week. So again, Ray, thanks so much. Neil, thanks so much. Sister Annette, Sister Linda. And we'll see you all next week at 7 o'clock at this station. Thanks so much. May the Lord bless you.
Amen.